Will you pray with me? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Who doesn't love a good healing story? They touch on our deepest needs and yearnings and hopes. And the gospel is full of them. In fact, we could argue that Jesus' primary role beyond teacher or preacher or community organizer is that he is a healer. And in Mark's story today, we certainly see that. Fresh off his first public appearance, where Jesus' preaching wows the crowd and his exorcism of the demon makes him an instant celebrity, folks are now lining up around the block just to get a touch or just to get a word. Mark tells us that Jesus finds himself a bit overwhelmed by the response, and so he ducks into the house of his close friend Peter to take a breather. Now, I can only imagine how Jesus must have been feeling, a bit heady with success perhaps, and maybe even a bit flummoxed by his healing power. After all, he's just getting started with this ministry thing. It's a lot to process. So he seeks a moment to rest himself and maybe get a nice home-cooked meal at Peter's house, recharge the batteries. But as he walks in the door, he learns that there is need for healing in this house too. Peter's mother-in-law is ill, and not just nursing a cold, but ill with a fever, which is very dangerous in those days. And so there is a cloud of worry hanging over the house. Now, women are rarely the main character in any Bible story, and so when they do show up, the writer has something very important to tell us, and we need to pay attention. So Mark tells us that Peter's mother-in-law is not just sick, not just in bed with the sniffles, but really ill, which means she would have been isolated from the rest of the family, confined to her bed and unable to be a part of things. So Jesus immediately goes to her and sits with her and takes her hand and lifts her up, and her fever is gone, and she immediately begins serving her guests. Now, I love to imagine Jesus sitting at her bedside, saying very little, just reaching out and taking her hand. It's a beautiful image of a caring and intimate God. It makes this idea of the incarnation, of God with us, very real. But I also have to admit that there is a part of this story which has always bothered me as well. I hear the women going, It's that last part where after she is healed, the old woman immediately gets up and starts cooking. I mean, really, guys, I want to say this woman has been flat on her back, sick in bed. The moment she's vertical, she's fixing you dinner. Couldn't you have given her a night off? Or couldn't you have brought her a bowl of chicken soup and gone make sandwiches for yourself and the guys, As a 21st century feminist, I resent the way this seems to diminish the woman to a servant in the household. But I have learned that my personal lenses are not always helpful. And so this time when I heard the story, I challenged myself to move past this knee-jerk reaction that I have, because I think it can prevent us from getting at the deeper meaning of the story. So here goes. So Mark's inclusion of this mother-in-law, and Lord, I wish she had a name. She's not named. Maybe we'll call her Gladys. It's a lovely mother-in-law name. Mark's inclusion of Gladys in this story reveals some interesting family dynamics. Women were extremely vulnerable in first century Palestine. Their security and their status and their identity all came from their relationship within the family, and it depended entirely on their relationship with men. Without a man's protection, a woman's life was open to abuse and neglect. And this was especially true for older women. If she had no husband or sons, she had no one to protect her, no place to go. So being taken in by her son-in-law was a lifeline to her. It gave her a family. Now, there's another interesting detail to the story as well. There is no mention of Peter's wife. It is her mother who is the woman of the house. Perhaps Peter's wife died of an illness or in childbirth. But she's never mentioned in the Gospels, and so it could certainly be that Peter was a widower. He would have depended on his mother-in-law to run the household, to welcome guests, to provide food, and to be a source of hospitality, which was an essential and highly regarded role. That's where she found her place. It's how she belonged. It's what gave her life meaning. See, the concept in healing in the scriptures is a very rich one, and it's filled with metaphorical power. For there are a million ways that we can be ill, countless ways that we can be broken, that affects both our bodies and our souls. So Jesus' role as healer was not about his medical skill. It was about him being a source of wholeness, about finding our completeness in God. It was about him calling us back to the people that we were meant to be. And so in the case of Peter's mother-in-law, Jesus' healing was not just about curing her fever, but about restoring her back to herself, restoring her to her place within her community, which despite our modern assumptions was not about servitude. It was about ministry. For the word that Mark uses for serve does not mean wait on. It means minister to. It was the word that was later used to describe the work of deacons in the early church. And so when Jesus cures her of her fever, he restores her ministry. Her readiness to serve her guests was her joyful response to being back to who she truly was meant to be, being able to freely embrace the purpose that she had in her heart. Think a moment about your own lives. Think about those roles and those callings that make us feel like we truly belong, like we contribute, like we are living out the purpose that God has placed within us. They may not necessarily be a professional ministry role like a doctor or a teacher or a pastor, but they could be. But the roles may be more integral to who we are underneath the titles. Perhaps we live out our calling as a parent, or a partner, or a mentor, or a friend. It could be that we are an artist and sharing our art is the way that we minister to the world. Or maybe we have grown into the role of caregiver to someone that we love, and it touches us in a deep and meaningful place. What happens when we are no longer able to live into that calling? What happens if illness or heartache or brokenness of any kind keeps us from it? We often feel cut off from our sense of purpose, our sense of belonging. We feel incomplete. And more than anything else, we need to be restored back to ourselves, that we might be able to live and to serve as we were meant to be. Serving one another is at the heart of the gospel calling. It's what it means to follow Jesus. Again and again, we see Jesus reaching out to serve those around him. His ministry puts him in contact with the deep suffering of the world, and broken people just seem to be drawn to him. Mark tells us that all it took was one little healing of the possessed man in the synagogue that we read about last week, and the crowds begin to line up out the door and around the house. The needs of the world are just that many. There is no end to the way that human beings are broken. But rather than being scared off by all of this, Jesus stays and he serves until late into the night. He knows that merely preaching the message that God's kingdom is at hand is not enough. He needs to show them. And so he does. But the need can seem endless, and that kind of relentless healing comes at a personal cost, even for Jesus. And so after the crush of the crowd is over, he sneaks out in the middle of the night to find a quiet place to catch his breath. He needs to tap into the deep well of healing power within him. He needs to connect with God and be restored to his true purpose. So he finds a deserted place to pray and to fill his well once again. Now, this is a powerful reminder to all of us that our call to serve one another can only be met if we take time out to refresh ourselves, to nourish our souls. For Peter's mother-in-law, the touch of Jesus restored her energy to serve. But we, who can't reach out and touch Jesus today, must find other ways to restore our souls, to reconnect with God. For no matter how much we love what we do, we will occasionally need to step back from it to be able to take a breath and regain our passion. And that is why so many healing professionals, pastors included, find that taking a sabbatical is not just a nice thing to do. It's not just a perk of the job. It's essential to doing what we love. And isn't this a nice segue? For as most of you know, that in 3 months, actually a little less, I will be taking my own sabbatical. I'll be stepping back from this place to recharge my batteries and renew my spirit. And yes, I am excited. And no, I don't have a countdown clock in my office. But as the time does get closer, I do find a lot of emotions surfacing for me. The first is a real sense of longing to take a break, longing to spend time with my family, longing to remember who I am when I am not Pastor Ann. And part of me is craving that, and I believe that to be very healthy. But please don't misunderstand me. I absolutely love my call here. Just this week I was having lunch with someone, and I was talking about this church, and I realized I was gushing on like a teenager. It was actually kind of embarrassing. But it's true. This place and you people energize me and inspire me. And I feel the power of the Spirit so viscerally in what we do and who we are, and being a conduit for that Spirit is a joy and a privilege. But I'd be lying if I denied that it's not a lot of work as well. For pastoring is a strange gig. It has very fluid boundaries. It doesn't have set hours. On any given day, I wear the hat of counselor, teacher, writer, executive director, PR agent, worship leader, and chief cook and bottle washer. Even my day off is usually spent in some degree of planning for the busy week ahead. Because I live in Montclair, I find that trying to take personal time when I am truly off the clock to be challenging. I never know when my trip to the grocery store or my walk in the park or my workout at the gym will become a pastoral conversation with someone in need. Now, there's something really wonderful about having one's personal life and professional life be so integrated. But there's also something rather draining about it too. And every once in a while, it is essential to take a moment and to step back so that I can remind myself why I love this so much and refill the well. But I don't kid myself. This is going to be very hard for me too. I've been your minister for 5.5 years, and I've served this community for a total of 11 years. My relationships here are deep, and I've gotten into a rhythm of responding to needs and addressing crises and caring about this community, and that's going to be hard to break that rhythm. I know I will go through my own period of withdrawal from all of you that will be challenging at times. Sure, I will occasionally find myself jonesing for FCC and sneaking into the closet with my laptop to check the church's Facebook page or catch the latest sermon on YouTube. And I'm going to be depending on John to sort of back me out of there. Because separating from the people you love and who love you is never easy, even when it's just temporary, even when it's only 3 months. But sometimes it is the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for them. And I know that that will be true for all of us here. And that is what I believe Mark is telling us in this passage. My guess is that when Jesus snuck off into the wilderness that night, he was wrestling with a lot of complicated emotions as well. It must have been deeply rewarding for him to be able to heal all of those people. But it must also have been devastating to see those lines around the house and know that the scope of human suffering that was lined up at his door will always be there. That no matter how many he touched, there would always be more. The only way that Jesus could be truly present for those who needed him was to step away and recharge. For those of us here who are called to care, and that is all of us, finding time to step back can sometimes feel irresponsible, or at the very least, self-indulgent. Serving is not supposed to be about us, right? But Jesus reminds us that caring for ourselves is often the best way to be good caregivers for others. Peter's mother-in-law needed to receive care before she could resume her ministry of hospitality. And Jesus needed to recharge his batteries so that he could continue to meet the needs of those in the next town. I need to take a sabbatical to reconnect with my source of strength, that I might continue to serve all of you with renewed energy and joy. And this bit of pastoral wisdom applies to each of us here and to all of you. So as we move deeper into the calling that God has placed on our hearts, I pray that each of us might find that well of refreshment within our own lives, that we might connect with the source that has called us into our life's purpose. For only then will we really be healed to be who we are and can be agents of healing in God's world. Thanks be to God, and amen.